The first lie Deborah told the police was that I had poisoned the water. The second was that the water belonged to her. The steel valve groaned beneath my wrench at 6:12 that morning, a deep metallic cry that rolled across the pasture and sent two horses lifting their heads from the fence line. Cold mist clung to the grass. The air smelled like wet soil, diesel, and the faint burnt copper odor of a pump motor that had been running far too long. I leaned my weight into the handle. The blue wheel turned another quarter rotation. Inside the buried pipe, water hissed, shuddered, then stopped. For the first time in 3 years, my ranch was no longer feeding Silver Pines Estates. I checked the pressure gauge bolted beside the valve. The black needle trembled, slid toward 0, and settled there, exactly where it was supposed to. 7 minutes later, sirens screamed down Caldwell Road. Red and blue light flashed through the cottonwoods. 3 county patrol vehicles tore through my open gate, tires grinding over gravel and throwing pale dust across the pasture. I set the wrench beside my boot and raised both hands before the first deputy even opened his door. Deborah Whitlock arrived behind them in her white Cadillac Escalade. She didn't park. She stopped sideways across my gate like she owned that too. "He's destroying the community water system," she shouted before her heels touched the ground. Her phone was already recording. "There are children without drinking water. He threatened us, and I believe he put something in the line." That last sentence changed everything. The younger deputy moved toward me with one hand near his cuffs. His partner, a broad-shouldered man with gray at his temples, studied the valve, the gauge, and the orange survey stakes running along my fence. "Sir," he said, "step away from the equipment." I did. Rust from the wrench had stained my palm orange. I could feel the cold metal imprint still pressed into my skin. Deborah marched closer, perfume cutting through the smell of mud and hot machinery. She wore cream-colored tennis clothes and sunglasses despite the cloudy sky. Her smile was tight, victorious. "I warned him," she told the deputies. "This man has been harassing our residents for weeks. Now he's cut off water to 114 homes." I looked past her toward the eastern ridge. Above the rooftops of Silver Pines, the decorative fountain was still spraying silver arcs into the morning air. So much for 114 homes without water. The older deputy saw it too. "Ma'am," he said slowly, "is that fountain part of the same system?" Deborah's jaw tightened. "That's irrelevant." "No," I said. "It's the only thing I turned off." She spun toward me. "You don't get to speak." The deputy raised a hand. "Actually, he does." I reached into my jacket carefully and pulled out a clear plastic folder. Inside were the ranch deed, the water rights certificate, the 30-day termination notice, and a county stamp diagram showing exactly which pipe I had closed. Deborah laughed when she saw the papers. A sharp, brittle sound. "He prints documents in his barn," she said. "Arrest him before he contaminates anything else." The younger deputy took out his cuffs. For 1 second, all I could hear was the ticking of my cooling pump motor and the dry flutter of Deborah's HOA notice tied to my fence. Then I pointed to the blue valve. "Before you arrest me," I said, "ask her why her entire neighborhood has been pulling water from a private agricultural well that doesn't appear anywhere on its construction permit." The cuffs stopped moving. Deborah's smile disappeared. What she didn't know was that I had spent 6 weeks preparing for this exact morning. Every invoice, every camera angle, every forged signature. She thought she had called 911 to have a rancher arrested. In reality, she had just summoned the first witnesses to her own crime. 6 weeks earlier, the sound that woke me wasn't loud. It was wrong. A low mechanical hum crawled through the bedroom wall at 2:07 in the morning, steady enough to vibrate the glass of water on my nightstand. I lay still for a few seconds, listening. The ranch pump was running. That made no sense. Both cattle tanks had been full before sunset, and the irrigation line was shut down for winter. That pump should have been silent until dawn. My name is Ethan Caldwell. I'm 42 years old, and I've lived on that ranch long enough to know every sound it makes after dark. Fence wire sings when the wind comes down from the ridge. Cottonwood branches scrape the roof when a storm moves in. Coyotes bark from the dry creek bed around midnight. But that pump had a different voice. It sounded strained. I pulled on my jeans, shoved my feet into work boots, and stepped outside without bothering with a coat. The cold hit my chest like a sheet of metal. Frost silvered the pasture. Somewhere near the barn, one of the horses stamped against frozen ground. The pump house sat 50 yards from the back porch, a squat concrete structure my father built in 1989. By the time I reached it, I could smell the problem. Hot insulation, burnt dust, a faint copper sting in the air. I unlocked the door and found the motor shivering on its mounts. The pressure gauge was pinned 20 pounds higher than normal. Condensation trembled along the steel pipe like sweat. "Easy," I muttered, resting my palm against the housing. The metal was almost too hot to touch. I killed the breaker. The motor coughed once, spun down, and the sudden silence felt heavier than the noise. That pump fed 2 livestock tanks, 1 workshop sink, and a backup fire reservoir near the north barn. Nothing else. At least, nothing it was supposed to feed. I grabbed a flashlight and followed the main line east. The pipe ran underground, but my father had marked its path with blue-painted fence posts every 100 feet. He believed buried infrastructure should never become a mystery. "Steel forgets nothing," he used to say. People do. At the eastern fence, my flashlight caught fresh dirt. A narrow strip of soil had been disturbed beneath the dead grass. Too straight for an animal, too clean for erosion. I knelt and pressed my fingers into it. The dirt was loose and damp. Someone had dug there recently. I went back for a shovel. 10 minutes later, the blade struck metal with a dull clang. I cleared the soil by hand and found a new coupling attached to my father's original line. Bright, galvanized steel against 40-year-old iron. A black polyethylene pipe branched away from it and disappeared beneath the fence towards Silver Pines Estates. Around the joint, someone had wrapped red electrical tape. A torn piece fluttered from the fitting in the cold air. I stared at that pipe while the truth settled into place. The manicured lawns beyond the ridge. The community pool. The decorative fountain that ran even during drought restrictions. They weren't using city water for all of it. They were using mine. Back inside the pump house, I photographed every gauge, every serial number, and the reading on the electric meter. Then I pulled 12 months of utility bills from the filing cabinet. The numbers climbed across the pages. 30%, 50%, then nearly 4 times my normal usage. Someone had been stealing thousands of gallons every night and making me pay to move it. I stood there under the buzzing fluorescent light, holding those bills while the burnt smell lingered in my clothes. That was the moment this stopped being a mechanical problem. Someone had connected an entire neighborhood to my ranch, and they had done it believing I would never hear the pump running in the dark. By sunrise, I had enough photographs to prove the pipe existed. What I didn't have was an explanation. Silver Pines Estates sat beyond my eastern fence like a different country. My side was cedar posts, cattle tracks, and brown winter grass. Their side was clipped hedges, stone entry pillars, and lawns so green they looked painted. At 9 that morning, their fountain was throwing water 20 feet into the air. We were under county drought restrictions. I parked beside the clubhouse and watched silver spray drift across a bed of imported flowers. The air smelled like chlorine, fresh mulch, and money. Sprinklers clicked along the sidewalk, watering grass already wet enough to shine. Every pulse of water felt personal. Inside, a woman behind the reception desk asked whether I had an appointment. "No," I said. "I have a water line." That brought Deborah Whitlock out of her office. She was 54, tall, blonde, and polished in the way expensive kitchens are polished. Smooth surfaces, sharp edges, nothing warm. Cream-colored slacks, gold watch, white leather shoes that had never touched actual dirt. She smiled before I introduced myself. "Mr. Caldwell, I've heard about you." That sentence told me she already knew why I was there. I placed 3 photographs on the glass table between us. The fresh trench, the galvanized coupling, the black pipe crossing beneath my fence. "This line is connected to my ranch well." Deborah glanced down for less than a second. "That's the community supply easement." "No, it isn't." Her smile stayed in place, but her fingers tightened around a silver pen. "Our development purchased legal access from the previous landowner." "There was no previous landowner." She tilted her head. "My family has owned Caldwell Ranch since 1964. I continued. "My father installed that main line. I maintain the pump. I pay the electricity." Deborah walked toward the window and looked across the neighborhood as if admiring something she had personally created. "Records change," she said. "Properties evolve. Communities require infrastructure. Stealing water isn't infrastructure." Her reflection stiffened in the glass. Behind her, the fountain kept rising and falling. She turned slowly. "I would be careful with that word. I would be careful with my pipe." For the first time, the smile slipped. Only for a second. Then she folded her arms and switched to the voice people use when they want cruelty to sound professional. Silver Pines has 114 households. Families. Retirees. Children. You are talking about disrupting essential services because of some sentimental attachment to an outdated ranch system. I looked through the window. A maintenance worker was hosing dust from the clubhouse driveway. 2 sprinklers soaked an empty dog park. Beyond them, the swimming pool shimmered beneath a blue cover. Your homes have city water, I said. This line feeds irrigation, the pool, and that fountain. Deborah's eyes sharpened. That was confirmation. She hadn't expected me to know the difference. You don't understand the agreement, she said. Then show it to me. I don't release HOA records to non-members. The agreement supposedly has my family's name on it. That doesn't make you entitled to internal documents. I almost laughed. Instead, I gathered my photographs. Deborah stepped closer. Her perfume smelled like lilies poured over cigarette smoke. You ranch people always think ownership means absolute control, she said quietly. It doesn't. Not anymore. I paused at the door. Water leaves a record, I told her. Pressure, power use, meter readings. Every gallon has a trail. Her jaw tightened. As I crossed the parking lot, sprinklers hissed beside my boots. Behind me, Deborah was already speaking rapidly into her phone. That afternoon, a certified letter arrived at my ranch. It warned me against tampering with Silver Pines community infrastructure. They had connected themselves to my well, made me pay the bill, and now they were threatening me for touching it. But Deborah had made one mistake. She had called the stolen line an easement. An easement's leave paper. The first number that made me angry was $28,000 for $116. That was how much extra electricity and pump maintenance had cost me over 3 years. I found it by spreading every utility bill across my kitchen table and building the timeline 1 month at a time. The old invoices smelled like dust and printer ink. Coffee went cold beside my elbow while the numbers kept climbing. The increase started 6 weeks before Silver Pines opened its clubhouse. Then came the pool, then the fountain, then the new irrigation zones. Every improvement they advertised had left a mark on my meter. I called the electric company and requested hourly usage records. The representative emailed them that afternoon. The pattern was almost perfect. The pump surged at 4:30 every morning. Again at noon. Again after midnight. Those weren't cattle schedules. Those were sprinkler cycles. I printed the graphs, placed them beside photographs of the hidden pipe, and drove to the monthly HOA meeting. Silver Pines held meetings in a clubhouse room designed to make ordinary people feel underdressed. Stone fireplace, leather chairs, brass nameplates. The air smelled like lemon polish and expensive coffee. Deborah sat at the center of a long table beneath a framed sign that read Community First. I almost admired the joke. Residents filled 3 rows of folding chairs. Some looked curious. Others looked at me like I had arrived carrying a disease. Deborah tapped her gavel. Mr. Caldwell has requested time to address the board regarding the community water system. My water system, I said. Murmurs moved through the room. I handed copies of the bills to each board member. For 3 years, Silver Pines has pumped water from my agricultural well. I paid the electricity. I paid for motor repairs. I paid to replace 2 pressure switches and a cracked impeller. Deborah leaned back. Those expenses are part of your responsibility under the easement. Then produce the easement. Her mouth tightened. A man in a golf shirt raised his hand. Are you saying our homes could lose water? No. Your houses use the municipal line. My well feeds landscaping, the pool, and decorative features. Deborah struck the table with her gavel. That is an irresponsible oversimplification. No, I said. It's plumbing. A few people laughed. She didn't. Deborah stood and faced the room. What Mr. Caldwell fails to understand is that water infrastructure protects property values, supports fire readiness, and serves vulnerable residents. He has threatened to shut down essential community resources unless we pay him an outrageous private ransom. I hadn't named a price. I hadn't threatened anyone. But fear moves faster than facts. An older man in the front row asked whether his granddaughter would be safe. A woman near the door accused me of targeting families. Deborah let each question land before answering with soft concern. She was turning theft into charity. Then someone touched my arm. A thin woman with silver hair stood beside me, holding a folded sheet of paper. Her hands trembled slightly. "My name is Martha Keene," she whispered. "Don't open this until you leave." She slipped the paper into my folder and returned to her seat without looking at Deborah. The meeting ended with the board voting to authorize legal action if I interfered with what they called shared infrastructure. Outside, cold wind pushed dry leaves across the parking lot. I opened Martha's paper beneath a security light. It was her monthly HOA statement. Near the bottom, below landscaping and clubhouse fees, one line had been highlighted in yellow. Private water infrastructure fee, $96. I read it twice. 114 homes. $96 each. Every month. Silver Pines wasn't just stealing my water. They were selling it back to their residents. Behind me, the clubhouse doors opened and Deborah stepped outside, phone pressed to her ear. Our eyes met across the parking lot. She saw the paper in my hand, and for the first time, she looked afraid. The document that changed everything carried my father's signature. It was dated 2 years after we buried him. Rachel found it in the county archive on a Thursday afternoon, folded into a digital permit file for Silver Pines Phase 2. My sister worked in county accounting, which meant she knew where records went when someone wanted them technically public but practically invisible. She called me at 4:18. "You need to come see this." Her voice had lost its usual warmth. 20 minutes later, I was sitting beside her in a basement records room that smelled like old paper, hot toner, and concrete dust. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. A scanner clicked somewhere behind the shelves. Rachel turned her monitor toward me. The screen showed a utility map, stamped approved. A blue line ran from my ranch well, beneath the eastern fence, and straight into Silver Pines. At the bottom was a transfer authorization granting permanent water access to the development. The signature read Daniel Caldwell. My father. I stared at it until the letters blurred. Dad had died on March 11, 2018. The document was signed July 27, 2020. Rachel placed his death certificate beside the keyboard. "I checked 3 times," she said. "There's no amendment, no estate authorization, no power of attorney. Nothing." I leaned closer to the screen. The signature looked convincing at first. Same long D, same sharp angle in the final L. Whoever made it had studied him. But they had missed one thing. My father wrote the capital C in Caldwell without lifting his pen. One clean motion, fast and narrow, like a hook pulled through water. On the permit, the C had been drawn in 2 separate strokes. I had watched Dad sign cattle invoices at our kitchen table for 30 years. That wasn't his hand. That map got the subdivision approved. I asked. Rachel nodded. Without it, they couldn't prove adequate secondary water capacity for landscaping and fire reserves. The room suddenly felt colder. The stolen water wasn't an accident. It was part of the project from the beginning. I asked for certified copies of everything. When we stepped outside, evening wind pushed grit across the courthouse steps. My phone vibrated with a motion alert from the ranch camera. The video showed a white service truck parked near my eastern fence. A man in a dark jacket climbed through a gap beside the gate carrying a metal toolbox. I recognized him from the HOA meeting. Travis Boone. His company maintained the Silver Pines irrigation system. Rachel and I watched him kneel beside the buried coupling. He checked the fitting, photographed the pipe, then opened his toolbox. A roll of red electrical tape sat inside. The same bright red tape wrapped around the illegal connection. "Save that video," Rachel said. I already did. Travis stayed on my land for 11 minutes. Before leaving, he sprayed fresh dirt over the trench and pressed dead grass across it with his boots. He wasn't repairing anything. He was hiding evidence. The next morning, I drove to his office. Boone Utility Services occupied a metal building behind a tire shop. The air inside smelled like rubber, grease, and stale cigarettes. Travis stood behind a counter, wiping his hands with a red shop rag. I placed a still image from the camera in front of him. His face drained. "You were trespassing." I was inspecting shared infrastructure. Shared according to a forged document? His eyes flicked toward the office door. That was all I needed. He knew. Before I left, he muttered, "You don't understand who you're dealing with." I slid the photograph back into my folder. "No," I said, "but I'm starting to understand how she did it." That afternoon, Deborah sent another certified warning. This one threatened an emergency injunction if I touched the valve. I read it beside my father's death certificate and the false permit bearing his name. Then I called a water rights attorney. Deborah thought the pipe was her strongest weapon. She didn't realize it had become a trail leading straight back to her. Helen Ward listened without interrupting. That was the first reason I trusted her. Most attorneys fill silence because they're afraid someone else might control it. Helen used silence like a measuring tool. She studied the forged permit, the electric bills, Martha's HOA statement, and the footage of Travis crossing my fence. Then she tapped one finger against the photograph of the blue valve. Do not shut it off yet. I sat back. That line is stealing water. I know. They're charging residents for it. I know. And Deborah is threatening to sue me for touching equipment on my own land. Helen looked up, which is why we're going to let her believe she still has control. Her office overlooked the county courthouse. Rain clicked softly against the windows. The room smelled like leather folders and black coffee. Helen drew 3 boxes on a legal pad. Technical, legal, psychological. She circled the first. Technically, we prove your action cannot endanger anyone. Silver Pines has a municipal drinking water connection and a separate fire hydrant loop. We isolate only the unauthorized ranch line. She circled the second. Legally, we notify everyone before Deborah can invent an emergency. County Water Resources, Fire Marshal, Sheriff's Department, Utility Commission, Certified Delivery, signatures required. Then she tapped the third box. Psychologically, we do not tell Deborah the exact time. I understood before she finished. She'll panic. She'll lie, Helen corrected. And this time, she'll lie on a recorded line. The plan took 12 days. A licensed engineer traced every connection between my well and Silver Pines. He confirmed the ranch pipe fed the pool, fountain, irrigation system, and one decorative retention pond. Not a single kitchen faucet. Not one shower. Not one fire hydrant. I installed a second pressure gauge beside the Blue Sea 17 valve and mounted 2 weatherproof cameras on opposing fence posts. One captured the handle. The other captured anyone approaching from the HOA side. Rachel organized the evidence by date. Martha quietly collected 3 years of fee statements from residents. Helen sent the termination notice by certified mail, email, courier, and hand delivery. Deborah refused the courier envelope, so he photographed her refusing it. That photograph went into the file too. The fire marshal inspected Silver Pines' municipal backup and signed a letter confirming there was no public safety risk. The county water officer stamped my right to disconnect the unauthorized line. Every document narrowed Deborah's options. She responded with noise, emails and capital letters, threats of emergency injunctions, a neighborhood alert accusing me of domestic terrorism against essential infrastructure. Then Travis returned. At 1:43 in the morning, Camera 2 caught him walking toward the valve with bolt cutters and a flashlight between his teeth. I watched from the dark pump house. He reached for the new chain around the control box. Floodlights snapped on. Travis froze. I stepped outside holding my phone, not a weapon. You're being recorded. His flashlight hit the dirt. I was checking for leaks. With bolt cutters? He looked toward Silver Pines, where the fountain glowed blue above the rooftops. Then he ran. I didn't chase him. I saved the footage, called the sheriff's non-emergency line, and added the incident number to Helen's folder. By dawn, everything was ready. The cameras were live. The officials had notice. The municipal system was verified. The blue valve belonged to me, and every signature proving it was now backed up in 3 places. All that remained was to turn the wrench. Helen had been right about Deborah. I wasn't preparing to shut off water. I was shutting down her money, her story, and the illusion that she owned anything on my side of the fence. And I knew exactly what she would do when the pressure dropped. She would call 911. The call reached 911 before the pressure gauge hit 0. I know because the dispatch recording carried a timestamp. 6:09 and 42 seconds a.m. At that moment, I was still standing beside the blue valve, the wrench resting against my shoulder, with water moving through the line. Deborah had reported the crime before it happened. Her voice on the recording was breathless, sharp, almost theatrical. There's an armed man sabotaging our community water system. He threatened families. I think he poured chemicals into the well. I heard the recording later. That morning, all I heard were sirens. By 6:12, the valve was closed. By 6:16, 3 patrol vehicles were racing through my gate. Every second had been captured. Camera 1 showed me checking the pressure gauge, photographing the meter, and turning the valve exactly as the county authorization permitted. No chemicals, no weapon, no threats. Camera 2 showed Deborah's Escalade parked beyond the fence before the first deputy arrived. She had been waiting. That detail mattered. Deputy Nolan Pierce stepped out of the lead vehicle with one hand near his holster. His partner moved toward me from the left while a younger officer checked the pump house. Hands where I can see them. I raised them. The wrench dropped onto the dirt with a heavy clang. Deborah came through the gate behind them, shouting loud enough to make the horses pull away from the fence. He poisoned it. I saw him near the well. Children are already without drinking water. I looked toward Silver Pines. Kitchen lights glowed in the nearest houses. A sprinkler still clicked across the entrance lawn, fed by the municipal line. The hydrant beside the clubhouse stood under full pressure. Nothing she said matched what the deputies could see. Nolan noticed. "Ma'am, did you personally see him put something into the water?" Deborah hesitated for half a second. Then she committed. "Yes." Camera 2 had a clear view of her arriving after the valve was closed. She had never been near the well. Nolan turned to me. "Do you have any firearms on you?" "No." "Did you threaten anyone?" "No." "Did you add any substance to the line?" "No. And the line I closed doesn't supply drinking water." Deborah cut in. "He's lying. The whole community depends on that system." I pointed toward the fountain beyond the ridge. Its spray was falling lower now, silver arcs shrinking in the morning light. "That's what depends on it." The younger officer returned from the pump house. "No chemical containers," he said. "No signs of tampering beyond the shutoff." Deborah's face tightened. She lifted her phone higher and started narrating for whoever was watching her live stream. "This is what happens when law enforcement refuses to protect taxpayers from domestic intimidation." Nolan's patience hardened. "Ma'am, stop broadcasting and answer my questions." She ignored him. So I asked permission to retrieve the folder from my truck. Inside were copies of the fire marshal's inspection, the county water authorization, the engineer's system map, and the certified termination notice Deborah had refused to accept. Nolan read each page slowly. The wind lifted dust across his boots. Somewhere behind us, the pump motor ticked as it cooled. Then Helen arrived. Her gray sedan stopped beside the patrol cars. She stepped out carrying a black case and walked straight to Nolan. "I represent Mr. Caldwell. I also have the complete camera archive and the dispatch timeline." Deborah's mouth opened. Helen looked at her. "You called 911 3 minutes before the valve was closed." Silence spread across the pasture. Even Deborah stopped talking. Nolan glanced from the timestamp to the still-running municipal sprinkler visible beyond the fence. Then he looked back at Deborah. "So you reported poisoning before any water had been shut off?" Her answer came too fast. I knew what he intended. "That isn't what you told dispatch." For the first time that morning, Deborah lowered her phone. She had called 911 to create a victim. Instead, she had created a recorded lie, 3 police witnesses, and a timeline she could never explain away. The handcuffs had been meant for me. Deputy Pierce carried them in his left hand while he compared Deborah's 9/11 statement with the county authorization Helen had placed on the hood of his patrol car. The metal links clicked softly whenever the wind moved his arm. Deborah kept talking. That was her final mistake. "This man is manipulating documents," she said. "I have the official utility map proving Silver Pines owns that line." Helen looked at me. I already knew what was coming. "Then show it to the deputy," she said. Deborah reached into her Escalade and returned with a leather binder. Her fingers moved too quickly as she flipped through the pages. When she found the map, she held it up like a courtroom victory. "There, permanent access. Signed by the original owner." Pierce took the document. The county water inspector arrived 30 seconds later in a mud-splattered truck. His name was Calvin Reese, and he had inspected the C-17 system 2 days earlier. He knelt beside the valve, wiped dust from the blue housing, and exposed the stamped serial number. "Registered agricultural line," he said. "Caldwell family. No transfer recorded." Deborah pointed at her map. "That is the transfer." Helen opened her black case. She removed my father's death certificate and placed it beside the signature. The date of death read March 11th, 2018. The authorization had supposedly been signed on July 27th, 2020. Nobody spoke. The only sound was the faint hiss of pressure bleeding from the closed pipe. Pierce studied both pages, then looked at Deborah. "Your original owner signed this 2 years after he died." Her face went pale beneath her makeup. "It must be a filing error." "Dead men don't make filing errors," Helen said. A gray sedan rolled through the gate. Martha Keene stepped out holding a small envelope against her chest. She looked frightened, but she kept walking until she reached Pierce. "I have recordings," she said. Deborah turned sharply. "Martha, go home." Martha ignored her. Inside the envelope was a flash drive containing 3 HOA meetings. Pierce played the most recent file through his patrol computer. Deborah's voice came through the speaker, clear and cold. "If Caldwell refuses to sell, we keep drawing from the well until his electric costs force him to negotiate." Then Travis Boone's voice answered. "And the county map?" Deborah replied, "Already handled." The recording ended. For one long second, the pasture went completely still. Then Rachel arrived with a banker's box full of payment records. She set it on the patrol hood and opened the top folder. The monthly water fees had been transferred from the HOA account to Boone Utility Consulting. From there, regular payments moved into a property company owned by Deborah's brother. The stolen water had financed her private investments. A second patrol car brought Travis through the gate. He had been stopped less than a mile away with bolt cutters, red electrical tape, and copies of Silver Pine's utility plans in his truck. When he saw Deborah, whatever loyalty he had left disappeared. "She told me the ranch line was abandoned," he said. "She paid me to connect it and alter the inspection diagrams." Deborah backed toward her Escalade. "This is a misunderstanding." Pierce stepped between her and the driver's door. "No, ma'am. This is evidence." He read the accusations slowly, filing a forged public record, utility theft, criminal trespass, conspiracy, and making a false emergency report. Deborah's phone slipped from her hand and struck the gravel. Pierce lifted the cuffs. The same cuffs he had carried toward me. "Deborah Whitlock, place your hands behind your back." Her face twisted. "You can't arrest me. I'm the HOA president." The first cuff snapped around her wrist. Pierce's voice stayed calm. "Not anymore." As he closed the second cuff, the last silver stream from the Silver Pines fountain collapsed behind the ridge. The pressure was gone, and so was hers. 3 months later, water returned to Silver Pines through a pipe they actually owned. The city connection cost the HOA $480,000. Deborah had known that number years earlier. It was buried in an engineering report she locked inside a cabinet and never showed the residents. Stealing from my well had been cheaper, at least for her. The new line arrived beneath the county road in sections of blue PVC, carried by crews with permits clipped to their dashboards and inspectors standing beside every trench. No midnight digging. No forged signatures. No red tape wrapped around stolen fittings. Everything was documented. That mattered to me. Silver Pines residents gathered near the clubhouse when the municipal valve opened. Water pushed through the new system with a low thunder, rattling air from the pipes before settling into a clean, steady hum. Nobody cheered. Most of them looked tired. They had spent years paying $96 a month for private water infrastructure that never belonged to them. The court-appointed administrator returned those fees from the HOA reserve, then recovered additional money by selling 2 investment properties connected to Deborah's brother. Martha received the first refund check. She brought it to my ranch in an envelope and stood on the porch while wind moved through the cottonwoods. "I should have spoken sooner," she said. "You spoke when it mattered." She looked toward the eastern fence. "What happens to the HOA now?" "They vote." And they did. Every board member who had protected Deborah was removed. The residents elected a temporary council, opened the financial records, and gave Martha responsibility for transparency. She hated the title. That was probably why she was right for it. Travis pleaded guilty to falsifying utility diagrams, trespassing, and conspiracy. He surrendered his contractor's license and agreed to testify. Deborah fought everything. She blamed Travis, the county, the residents, me. But timestamps don't care who you blame. Neither do bank transfers, camera footage, or a dead man's forged signature. She was convicted of filing false public records, utility theft, conspiracy, misuse of HOA funds, and making a fraudulent emergency report. The judge ordered restitution, probation after incarceration, and a permanent ban from serving on any community association board in the state. Her white Escalade was sold to satisfy part of the judgment. I heard a plumbing contractor bought it. That felt appropriate. My settlement covered the stolen electricity, the damaged pump, legal fees, and every gallon the engineers could document. I used most of it to replace the old motor and build a dedicated fire reservoir near the north barn. Not for Silver Pines. For the volunteer department that had protected every ranch in the valley for 40 years without charging anyone for the privilege. On the day we tested it, the new pump started with a smooth electric hum. Water rushed into the steel tank, cold and clear, carrying the smell of wet iron into the afternoon air. The pressure gauge climbed. 40 pounds. 50. Then it held steady. I drove to the eastern fence with a wire brush and a can of blue paint. The C-17 valve was scarred from years of weather, but my father's stamped letters were still visible beneath the rust. I cleaned the housing slowly. Then I repainted the wheel the same deep blue Dad had used. The old Silver Pine sign sat in my truck bed. Community water facility, no trespassing. I hung it inside the pump house above the workbench, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. People like Deborah depend on confusion. They rename theft as policy, intimidation as safety, and greed as community service. Then they expect everyone else to accept the label. I didn't cut water to 114 homes. I closed one illegal valve. The residents kept drinking. The hydrants stayed pressurized. The only things that dried up were Deborah's stolen revenue and the power she had built around it. She thought authority meant opening a pipe and forcing someone else to pay. My father taught me differently. Real power is knowing what belongs to you, proving it without shouting, and waiting until the truth builds enough pressure to move everything in its path. Justice didn't roar across my ranch. It passed through dates, signatures, meter readings, and one old blue valve. Quiet, patient, inevitable.